Study notes for chapter reading. Thank you for taking the time to view this brief informational video about study notes. Study notes and the structure for it are adapted from Cornell Notes by Drs. Darling and Dukes. What are study notes? Well, the term study, or if you are so inclined, STUDI, is an acronym for Synthesize to Understand and Digest Information. It is a tool that is intended to increase your engagement and enhance your course preparation and enhance your course experience by allowing you to synthesize and incorporate additional information from the readings for chapters particularly. They will allow you to identify clear and unclear points that might arise as you read the information. The study notes will allow you to link to other course reading or other reading materials. And it allows you ultimately to make enriched contributions to class discussions or to increase your ability to do well on course assignments and other assessments. These are designed to engage you in your reading of the course content as well as to enhance your engagement in the course itself. This is the template for completing a study notes chapter. As you can see, there are three main sections. The first section at the top requires you to provide an overall summary of the chapter. Note that it says that you should use paraphrasing and original examples if applicable. This is actually a requirement. You will demonstrate your understanding of the content of the chapter by paraphrasing or putting it into your own words. Regurgitating the author's words will not be useful to you because that does not indicate that you have synthesized the information. The second box is the left-hand column, which requires you to record 3 to 4 questions or points of confusion you had while reading the chapter. As you're reading and using active reading strategies to be discussed later, you're asked to indicate questions that are muddy or unclear, or information that is unclear even after you read the chapter or that section. Now, that question might be answered later within that chapter, but at the time that you're reading that section, you might have some questions that you want to indicate in the margin. By the time you're finished reading the chapter, you might have more than 4. Some of them might already be answered, and some might be left unanswered. Those questions will come here on your study notes chapter. The last section requires you to record 3 to 5 notable points or main arguments put forth in the chapter. You are to again include significant details, salient examples, or critical vocabulary. Again, these notable points can be construed as main ideas or main arguments, and this is what is going to be considered the meat of the chapter. By indicating throughout what you think is a main idea, at the end you'll cull that down to 4 or 5, and identify critical vocabulary. This can include vocabulary that you do know the answer to, or you do know the definition for, but think that it's worth noting. Or it could include vocabulary that you're unfamiliar with. Once completed, how do you use these notes? Well, you can use these notes in class and out of class. In class, even online, can be while you're engaged on the course site. They can be used to clarify muddy questions, because other students might identify similar or different questions. They can be used to enhance your understanding of the content. They can be used as you incorporate them into your contributions or utilize contributions from others to clarify your own muddy questions or notable points. They allow you to contribute to class discussion boards, in-class discussions, or to state your opinion. And they can be used for referencing in using as citations for your discussion responses or learning probes, entrance cards, etc. Out of class, you can use this as a tool to review what you've learned or read for that chapter or that learning unit. You can also use it as preparation for other assessments like entrance cards, exams, or quizzes, if applicable. Ultimately, you want to be able to utilize this information to make connections to other courses, connections to readings within this course, or just connections in your head to your existing schema about where this information is housed. I mentioned active reading strategies previously. These were obtained from princeton.edu. Active reading strategies, the principle behind it is that you are actively engaged as you're reading the content. You are engaged in an interactive cognitive process that allows you to synthesize and incorporate the information that you're reading. This is accomplished by asking yourself pre-reading questions. Sometimes reading just the chapter title prompts you to question what this chapter might be about. Active reading also requires you to identify and define any unfamiliar terms as you're going along. Most textbooks will have some bolded terms that indicate that it's an important term for that chapter. But there might be terms utilized that are not bolded or highlighted, particularly by the author, that you think is unfamiliar to you and you want to identify. Once you get to what you think is the main idea or thesis of the reading, you might want to put an asterisk to it or underline it or otherwise indicate that this is in the crux of the chapter or the idea. You are dissuaded from using a highlighter. Students tend to highlight way too much information and not really identify succinct information. Instead, you should consider using marginal notes or comments within the margins. These ultimately can become the points identified for your study notes. Similarly, you want to write questions in the margins, especially questions that you are unclear about, or you can turn the reading itself into a question for that section. You can use diagrams, outlines, flowcharts, little characters, or whatever you'd like to use to allow you to visually understand what you are reading. You can go to the website below to see some examples of what they consider diagrams for reading. You want to read each paragraph carefully and determine what it says, what it does, and what it says. In one sentence, will you be able to repeat what you just read in one sentence, or the idea of what you just read? If you're unable to do this, we suggest that you go back and reread that section. For the study notes, you're asked to write a summary in your own words, and active reading strategies also require you to do the same. Being able to put the stuff into your own words will allow you to synthesize what you've read, incorporating into your existing schema, and then be able to explain it, which is actually the last step in active reading. They also suggest that you write your own exam question based on the reading. So at the end of reading that chapter, you might want to anticipate what might the instructor ask you as an assessment of your reading of that chapter. So completing study notes are several steps involved. Utilize the active reading strategies as you complete the assigned reading. You want to identify the appropriate template. As I said, study note chapter templates. There are study note templates for chapters as well as articles. So ensure that you're using the chapter template. As you're reading, you want to identify more information than is required by the template so that you can go back and cull that list down and really be succinct about what your questions are, what the notable points are, and what information needs to go into your summary. Your questions or points of confusion. As you're going through the chapter, you might identify many more than 4. As you're reading, you might come across the answer to some of those that you identified previously. So those can be eliminated from your final list. When you're writing both your summary and your notable points, use paraphrasing as much as possible. Again, you want to put this information into your own words so it sounds like your voice and it's familiar to you. These study notes will be graded, and how will they be graded? Well, we'll utilize rubrics. The rubrics are designed to specifically designed for the study notes. Therefore, for study notes chapter, there's an accompanying rubric that has 3 sections similar to what are on the study notes chapters. These are summary, questions or points of confusion, notable points. There are descriptions provided for ratings of needs improvement, acceptable or exemplary. These rubrics can be used in two ways. First and foremost, they're used by the instructor to evaluate your completed study notes. But that means that you should also use these rubrics to evaluate your own product prior to submitting. It is in fact suggested that you reread the rubric each time prior to completing your study notes, so you know what your expectations are. After completing your study notes, then I would check what you've written against the rubric to ensure that you met the criteria. Now let's take a look at the rubric. As you can see, the grading criteria are what you've done with your summary, your questions or points of confusion, and your notable points. Across the top, you'll see the ratings are needs work, acceptable, or exemplary. Let's start with the acceptable category because for exemplary, you would need to have met all the criteria in this category first. So your summary is 3 to 5 sentences, sometimes 50 words, but 3 to 5 succinct sentences in your own words, primarily conveying the main information from the chapter. To meet exemplary for this, it has to be written only in your own words. For questions or points of confusion, first and foremost, have you identified 3 to 5? Are those identified as real questions? Therefore, they're not incomplete thoughts or random thoughts. Are they coherent and relevant to reading that chapter, not necessarily larger questions about the course, but specifically to that chapter? To exceed or meet the exemplary categorization, you would have met these, and then you have identified a relationship between what your questions are and what your notable points are for the chapter. So have you answered your questions in the notable points? Last, your notable points, again, 3 to 5 are included. These two are written using primarily paraphrasing, and do they in fact pertain to the main points of the reading? To be in the exemplary category, your notes or main points are accompanied with an original example or linked to material from another course or concepts within or outside of this course. So are you able to link what you read in this chapter to either previous chapters or other course readings, and or are you able to link those notable points to information that you've learned in other courses? This will earn you 2 points. As you can see, if you are able to articulate information consistent with the exemplary category, you'd earn 5 points for your study notes. If you are in the acceptable category, then you're looking at 3.5 points. And then if you're only in the needs work category, then you're looking at 0 points. It is possible to go across categories. For example, your summary could be exemplary, your questions or points of confusion acceptable, and your notable points needs work. Obviously, that's not what you should be desiring. You should look at trying to meet exemplary for all 3 criteria. After you've written your study notes, you might want to ask yourself these guiding questions at the bottom to ensure that you've met the criteria. Have you written at least 3 sentences to summarize the chapter in your own words? Have I developed questions or identified points of confusion from the chapter? And then, if so, did you make an attempt to answer these questions with your notable points? Have you identified at least 3 notable points on the chapter? Remember, it asked you to do 3 to 5. And have you tried to link this to any material inside or outside of this course? By answering yes to all of these questions, then more than likely you will meet the exemplary criteria. It is advisable that as you embark upon reading the chapter, you have a hard copy of the reading material and use active reading strategies. So feel free to write in the textbook you own it. If you don't own it, make a copy so that you can make these active reading notes. You want to consult the course outline and the required reading column to determine which reading is required for this unit or this topic, to ensure that you're completing the correct study notes on the correct chapters.